When Daniel and Marissa found the apartment listing, it almost felt like a mistake. 2 bedrooms, decent neighborhood, rent well below market price. They were both 25, fresh out of college, drowning in student loans and credit card debt. The building itself was older, brick exterior, narrow hallways, the kind of place that smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. But it wasn't in bad shape. The landlord had explained the low price away by saying the previous tenant left suddenly and he just wanted it filled. They didn't ask questions. They signed. The first week felt normal. They unpacked boxes, argued over where the couch should go, ordered cheap takeout and ate on the floor because their dining table hadn't arrived yet. At night, the building was quiet. Almost too quiet. The kind of silence where you could hear your own breathing if the TV wasn't on. The scratching started on the 9th night. It was around 1:30 in the morning. Marissa was already asleep, but Daniel was still awake, scrolling on his phone in bed. That's when he heard it. Faint, uneven scraping from somewhere behind the bedroom wall. At first, he assumed it was rats. The building was old. It made sense. The sound lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then it stopped. He told Marissa about it in the morning, but she just shrugged. "We'll tell maintenance if it keeps happening." It did. The next night it came back. Same time, same wall, behind the headboard. This time it was louder, slower, like something dragging across the inside of the drywall. Daniel knocked on the wall once, hard. The scratching stopped immediately. That's what bothered him. If it had been an animal, it probably would have panicked, scrambled. But this stopped, instantly, like it had been listening. Maintenance came 2 days later. The guy checked the attic access, tapped along the wall, set a couple traps, just in case. He told them it was probably squirrels or pipes expanding. For 2 nights after that, there was nothing. Then it started again, but not in the bedroom. It was in the living room this time, directly behind the couch. Marissa heard it first. She muted the TV and just stared at the wall while the scratching dragged slowly from left to right. Not random, not chaotic, deliberate. Daniel grabbed a broom and slammed it against the drywall. Silence. They both stood there for a full minute without saying anything. That was the first night Marissa said what they were both thinking. That doesn't sound like an animal. Daniel didn't sleep much after that. The scratching began happening every night, always between 1 and 3 a.m. Sometimes in the bedroom, sometimes the living room. Once from inside the hallway wall near the bathroom. And it was changing. It wasn't just scratching anymore. There were soft thuds, faint shifting noises, what sounded like weight pressing against the inside of the wall. One night, Daniel swore he heard breathing. He didn't tell Marissa that part. Things in the apartment started feeling off. The bathroom mirror cabinet was slightly open when they were sure they'd closed it. A kitchen drawer left cracked, the chain on the front door swaying lightly, even though no one had touched it. Daniel began checking the locks obsessively before bed. Marissa suggested maybe the previous tenant had done something weird inside the walls. Hidden speakers, a prank. But the landlord seemed genuinely confused when they mentioned it again. He even looked annoyed. If there was something living in there, he told them, you'd see damage, droppings, smell something. There's nothing. That night, the scratching was the loudest it had ever been. It came from the bedroom wall again, right behind where Marissa's head rested. She shot upright in bed. "Daniel, it's right there." The sound dragged downward, slow, heavy. Daniel grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. He aimed it at the wall. The scratching stopped, but something else happened. A faint indentation pressed outward from inside the drywall. Not enough to break through. Just enough to push the paint outward in a shallow bulge, then slowly recede. Marissa screamed. Daniel backed away from the bed like the wall might explode. They didn't sleep in the bedroom after that. The next day, Daniel bought a small inspection camera from a hardware store, the kind plumbers use. He waited until late afternoon when sunlight filled the room and drilled a small hole behind where the indentation had appeared. He fed the camera inside. At first, it was just darkness and insulation. Then the camera shifted slightly and caught something that made Daniel's stomach drop. A narrow, open space, not typical wall framing. A gap big enough for a person to crawl through. He moved the camera deeper. That's when he saw the blanket. Crumbled, dirty, stuffed into the corner of the cavity. Next to it were empty water bottles and food wrappers. Daniel pulled the camera back so fast he nearly dropped it. Marissa was standing behind him when he turned around. "There's someone in our walls." They called the police immediately. 2 officers showed up within 20 minutes. They listened carefully, searched the apartment, then inspected the hole Daniel had drilled. One officer widened it carefully with a tool. They shined their flashlight inside. The crawl space extended the length of the apartment. Not part of the original layout. It looked like someone had deliberately hollowed out sections between units years ago. But it was empty. No person. Just the blanket, the bottles, the wrappers. One officer asked if they'd heard anyone moving recently. Daniel nodded. "Last night." The officer hesitated before saying something that stuck with them long after. "If someone's been in there, they probably heard you drill." The police searched the attic and adjacent units. They didn't find anyone. No forced entries, no broken locks. But as they were leaving, one officer quietly suggested they consider staying somewhere else for a while. That night, Daniel and Marissa packed essentials and went to stay with her sister. The landlord was furious when they demanded to break the lease. He insisted there was no proof anyone had been living inside the walls. The police report said, "Possible trespasser, unable to locate." It became a he said, she said situation. They never went back to spend the night. A week later, the landlord called Daniel. His tone had changed completely, shaken. He told Daniel that another tenant in the building, an elderly woman who lived alone, had reported hearing scratching in her walls. Maintenance opened her living room drywall to check for pests. Inside, they found something else. A small battery-powered camera, mounted between the studs, facing through a tiny drilled hole that aligned perfectly with her bookshelf. When police tore open more of the wall cavities, they discovered a crude network of crawl spaces connecting 3 units on that floor, including Daniel and Marissa's old apartment. They never officially released what else they found. But one of the officers who had first responded quietly called Daniel off record. He told him they believed someone had been living inside the walls for months, maybe longer, moving between apartments at night, watching, listening. The blanket and wrappers weren't old, they were fresh. And the most disturbing part, in the cavity above Daniel and Marissa's bedroom, officers found deep scratch marks carved repeatedly into the backside of the drywall. Long, vertical, overlapping, as if someone inside had been slowly tracing the outline of where the bed was positioned, over and over and over. The building was condemned 2 months later after more hidden compartments were discovered. No suspect was ever caught. Daniel still has the inspection camera. He keeps it in a drawer he rarely opens. Marissa refuses to live in any apartment built before 2010. And sometimes, late at night, Daniel says he still wakes up convinced he hears something faint behind the walls. Not random, not like an animal. Slow, patient, scratching.